Meet Opie the Ornitholestes. He's a smallish dinosaur from Jurassic North America, and would have been a bit like the coyote of its habitat. It lived alongside much bigger dinosaurs like Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Brachiosaurus. Opie has had his old look ever since I first introduced him way back in 2017, so it's about time he got an update. Every painting is a chance to learn something new, and this time I focused on lighting, texture, and mood. I'll explain more in the video.
Pete's Paleo Pet Shop!
Opie had a story featured in my short story collection, Dinosaurs Don't Play Fetch. So, I already had a more realistic drawing that I liked. I used this drawing in the same way I would use a rough sketch. Basically, it had the right idea for the pose, but it still needs some changes to make it Opie. Sometimes I have a hard time getting things to look right, so this one took a lot of tries and flipping back and forth to make sure the proportions were right. Scott Hartman's skeletal illustration was extremely helpful for this part. Flipping a drawing in the computer with a mirror really helps to get a fresh look at things. It helps the brain see the problems from a different angle and think in new ways. It can be overwhelming when looking at complicated details in photos, so it really helps to break it down into layers. My layers here are the outline of the body, a layer of longer, shaggier feathers, and then a few hints of individual groups of feathers on top. Most of the detail will be done with coloring, so this is mostly to help me figure out where those details should go. He's not really supposed to be flat after all. Once I'm happy with that, I turn the layer blue and start drawing the official lines. Some call this the inking stage, and you can use layers on a computer like I am, or a sunny window if you're drawing on paper. Put a clean sheet of paper over your sketch up against a window or a light box, and you'll be able to see the lines underneath to use as a guide for your details. It's good to vary how thick or dark the lines are. Darker, thicker lines are good for bottom edges, places of shadow, or places where something crosses over the other, like the arm and leg closer to us. Lighter, thinner lines are good for things further away and for inside details. I try to make sure most of the finer details are in important areas, like Opie's face. Time for color. Big blocks of color first, and then more detail later. I decided to go with a pattern closer to an illustration I painted back when I posted a new critter every week for Fossil Friday. I still love that style and the idea of Fossil Fridays, but a new illustration every week is a little too much for me at the moment. I'd love to bring it back when my kids are older, or if I figure out a schedule that works. I've discovered that painting these feathers is a little like painting fur. Fur is not exactly one of my strengths, so I scoured YouTube for tutorials. For me, it worked really well to start with a darker base color than I needed, then use Procreate's dry brush to paint the base color over that. It has a lovely way of making streaks of color, very much like clumps of fur, because fur tends to gather in clumps, and feathers seem to do the same. For the background, I take a look at my reference photo and then break it down into the basic shapes of the far background, the more detailed middle ground, and the foreground shapes that frame everything. I wanted to have an idea for the landscape before working on Opie's light details. Where is Opie, and what time of day is it? I love afternoon light, and I really wanted to experiment with a more dramatic look. I imagine the sun just starting to set and maybe touching the trees behind. The light pouring through and over the far branches and bathing the little clearing in a golden glow. Did I mention how much I really like this brush for those soft clumps of fur and feathers? It's perfect since I really want a more painterly feel to the texture. Long strokes make longer feathers, and short strokes with a smaller brush make the shorter fluff around the face. I keep a close eye on my reference photo to see the direction of the feathers for different parts of the body. For the scaly feet, snout, and underarms, I use the Oberon brush. When painting the background, I like to play around with the artistic brushes until I find something I like. Big shapes and splotches of color come first, especially in the far background. The far background is lighter in color here because this area is open and those shrubs and trees are further back. I used the Quoll brush a lot here. It reminds me of using a sponge to splotch shapes with acrylic paint. For the middle ground, I wanted to make a clear silhouette, so I used a different brush with a darker color. Two of the brushes I used most here were Terralea and Leatherwood. Terralea has the look of splotching paint onto a dry canvas to me. Crisper lines that don't blend in with the paint that's already on the canvas. I like Leatherwood for the same reason. Plus, it gives some variety to the types of foliage here. Lots of ferns in varying shades of green or brown are up next, plus some rocks for a variety. I can't remember which brush I used here, but I like how the paint looks a little wetter. In some places the colors smear together a little, while in other places there are nicely defined shapes. A bit like painting with oils. A nice dark foreground to frame everything, and then it's time to add shadows. It's amazing how much detail can be added just with the contrast of light and dark. With the colors still visible underneath, something that looks very complicated is actually quite simple. As with everything else, it helps to think in layers, or overlapping silhouettes. Light ferns over dark bushes, dark ferns over light ground, and light ferns over dark ground. The focus is on the edges, on groups of things, instead of getting lost in individual details. At least that's the theory. This is all a big experiment as I try to do what much more experienced artists say to do. All in all, Opie is my favorite painting so far. I love the light. I think I'm getting much better at making my silhouettes clear, and I really like how the composition frames him nicely. Maybe Opie needs to be a little more off to the side, but I'm still happy with him because his face is in the focus, and that is off-center. So it still follows that general rule of composition. I'm sure someone with more experience, or future me with more experience, will easily see what needs more work, but for now, I'm very happy with him. And that's important too. It's good to be able to stand back and appreciate something that you've worked hard to create. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with me. See you next time!